My son called it a family meeting. He even used that phrase, family meeting, like we were a corporation reviewing quarterly results, not a mother and her grown child sitting at a kitchen table. It started on a Sunday. I remember because I had just come in from the garden. I grow dahlias along the back fence, and October is when I cut them back before the first frost. I had dirt under my fingernails and mud on my boots when I heard his car in the driveway. He didn't call first. He never does anymore. My son, he's 43. His wife was with him. She stayed close to the door, the way people do when they want an exit available. My daughter-in-law has always been careful about positioning herself. I pulled off my boots at the mat and offered coffee. Neither of them wanted any. That was the first signal. My son always wants coffee. He sat down at the table and folded his hands the way his father used to when delivering difficult news. I sat across from him. The afternoon light came through the kitchen window and fell across the oak table I bought at an estate sale in 1987. I've eaten 37 years of meals at that table. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk about the house." I waited. "Gwyneth and I have been thinking." He glanced at his wife. She gave a small nod, rehearsed. "With the kids getting older, we're maxed out in the rental. 4 people in a 2-bedroom isn't sustainable." I said nothing. I've learned that silence pulls the truth out of people faster than questions. "You've got 4 bedrooms here," he continued. "You're using, what, 2? The master and your sewing room?" "Studio," I corrected him silently. "I call it my studio." "We were thinking," he said, and he said it the way someone says a thing they've practiced in a car, that it might make sense for us to take over the property. You'd still be here. We'd cover maintenance. It would actually take the burden off you." Burden. I looked at my hands, still faintly stained with garden soil. "I built this house?" "Not literally. A contractor built it in 1979, but I chose every fixture, painted every room, planted every bulb in that yard. My husband and I paid off the mortgage in 2008, the month before he was diagnosed." "And what would that look like exactly?" I asked. My son unfolded a piece of paper. It had been in his jacket pocket. He'd brought paperwork to a family meeting he called with no warning on a Sunday afternoon. "We'd transfer title," he said. "For tax purposes, you'd have full rights to stay. We'd handle the property taxes going forward. Full rights to stay. In my own house. As a guest with full rights." I folded my hands on the table, right on top of his paper. "I'll think about it," I said. His wife's posture relaxed. My son reached across and touched my hand, brief and businesslike. "That's all we're asking," he said. "Just keep an open mind." They left before dark. I stood at the window and watched the taillights of their car disappear around the curve of Millbrook Road. Then I walked through every room of this house. The den, where my husband read every evening in the wing-back chair. I still haven't moved. The guest room where Mother slept her last Christmas. The studio with its long table and the quilt I've been piecing together for 2 years. I stood in the doorway of each room and felt something settle in my chest. I was 68 years old. I had survived a husband's illness, a recession, a flood that took out half the basement, and 17 years of widowhood. I was not in decline. I was not overwhelmed. I was not a burden looking for relief. I was a woman being quietly asked to hand over the most significant asset of her life. And I had said I would think about it. What I didn't say was what I was actually going to think about. My name is Vivienne, and I've lived in this house in Central Ohio for 41 years. I want to be very clear about that. Not because I'm angry. Anger fades, but because what happened next is the kind of thing that deserves a clear record. The following Wednesday, they came back, both of them, again without calling. This time, my son carried a manila folder and his wife carried a casserole dish, which I recognized immediately as strategy. Nobody brings food to a negotiation unless they want you to feel guilty about saying no. The casserole was chicken and rice, not my favorite. My daughter-in-law knows I prefer pasta. The dish was for show. We ate at the oak table. My son talked about property tax rates in the county. His wife mentioned that the school district boundaries had changed, and the kids might need to transfer. I listened. I served the chicken I didn't ask for, and I listened to all of it. After dinner, my son opened the folder. I had a friend look this over, he said. Just informally, he's done estate work before. Estate work, not real estate. Estate work, not real estate. The document inside was a quitclaim deed, partially filled in. My name was already in one field. His name and his wife's name were in another. This is already drafted, I said. Just a template, nothing's finalized. A template with my legal name on it. I closed the folder gently and slid it back across the table. I told you I'd think about it. It's been 4 days, his wife said. First time she'd spoken directly to me all evening. I've been gardening, I replied. My son leaned forward. Mom, we're not trying to rush you. But winter's coming, and if we're going to make a transition before the end of the year, for tax reasons, we'd need to move on this in the next few weeks. For tax reasons. End of year. A timeline I hadn't agreed to for a decision I hadn't made. I understand the urgency you're feeling, I said. I'll be in touch. They left the casserole dish. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and wrote down every detail. The date, the folder, the pre-filled deed, the timeline they'd invented, the casserole. Then I wrote a name at the top of a separate page. My neighbor Adele's daughter is a family law attorney in Columbus. I had met her twice at Adele's Christmas parties, a composed woman in her early 50s named Patricia, who wore small gold earrings and had the kind of stillness that comes from spending decades in courtrooms. I found her number in my address book. I called the next morning. Patricia answered on the third ring. I explained what had happened, starting from the Sunday visit and ending with the pre-filled quitclaim deed. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Don't sign anything, and get a copy of that deed if you can." I told her I'd already photographed it while my son was in the bathroom. A pause. Then, "Good. Can you come in Thursday?" I drove myself to her office in Columbus on a cold October morning. The drive took just under an hour. I listened to public radio the whole way, a program about migratory birds. I wasn't frightened. I was focused. Patricia's office smelled of old coffee and carpet cleaner. She had framed photographs of Lake Erie on the wall and a large rubber plant in the corner that looked like it had been there since the Clinton administration. She listened to my full account, took notes in a small spiral notebook, and then sat back. "What you're describing," she said, "is a common pattern. Adult children, usually well-intentioned in their own minds, begin framing an elderly parent's assets as a family resource. They use language like burden and practical and what's best for everyone. The quitclaim deed is a red flag. It's a fast, quiet title transfer with very few legal protections for the grantor." I asked what my options were. She outlined 3. I could do nothing and continue to resist. I could formalize protections, a revocable living trust, an updated power of attorney specifying exactly who had authority over what, and a letter from my physician confirming I was of sound mind and managing my affairs independently. Or, she said, leveling her gaze at me, I could sell, on your own terms, she added. A clean market sale eliminates the asset from the equation entirely. There's nothing to contest, nothing to transfer, nothing to petition over. I drove home thinking about the migratory birds, how they leave not because they're pushed out, but because the season has shifted and they've read it correctly. 3 days after my meeting with Patricia, my son called. "Have you thought any more about the house?" he asked. Not hello, not how are you, just the house. "I have," I said, "and I think we should give it more time," I said. "I want to understand the tax implications fully before I commit to anything." He exhaled slowly. "Mom, I told you end of year is the window. Then we may miss the window," I said. Silence. Then, "I'm worried about you. Gwyneth is too." I asked what he was worried about specifically. "You're alone in that house. It's a lot to manage. Dad's been gone 9 years. Things fall through the cracks. Things fall through the cracks." I mentally listed what had fallen through the cracks recently. My gutters, cleaned in September. My furnace, serviced in August. My car, oil changed last month. My doctor's appointment, kept without reminder. "I appreciate your concern," I said. "I'll be in touch." I hung up before he could say anything else. 2 days later, his wife called. She was warm, almost sugary, which was worse. She mentioned that the children missed me. She said my granddaughter had been asking about Grandma's house, about the dahlias. She used the word legacy, as in, we just want to help you think about your legacy. Legacy. My daughter-in-law had never used that word to my face before. I recognized it as vocabulary borrowed from someone, possibly the estate attorney friend. I thanked her for calling and said goodbye. That evening, I pulled up the Ohio real estate listings and looked at comparable sales in my neighborhood. The house next door, smaller than mine, no studio, no finished basement, had sold in August for $412,000. I called Patricia the next morning. The following Tuesday, a man knocked on my front door at 10 in the morning. He wore a gray jacket and carried a leather portfolio. He introduced himself as a real estate consultant and said he'd been referred by my son and daughter-in-law. They mentioned you might be open to an evaluation of the property, he said. I had not mentioned any such thing to anyone. I told him I hadn't requested an evaluation and that I wasn't interested. He smiled patiently, the way people do when they've been coached to expect resistance. He said he could leave his card. I told him that wasn't necessary either. I closed the door, went directly to my phone, and called my son. You sent a realtor to my house, I said when he picked up. He's not a realtor, he's a consultant. Did I ask you to send anyone to my house? A pause. We thought it might help to just get a sense of the numbers. You thought, I said. Not we, you assumed, on my behalf, without my permission. Mom, you're getting upset over. I'm not upset, I said, and I meant it. I wasn't upset. Upset implies loss of control. What I felt was clarity, sharp and clean. I am telling you clearly, do not contact anyone on my behalf without asking me first. This is my house. These are my decisions. Do you understand? He said he understood. He'd understand. He didn't. That Friday, I received a call from a medical office in my town, confirming an appointment for a comprehensive cognitive screening. The appointment was in 2 weeks. I had never scheduled it. When I asked who had requested it, the receptionist said a family member had called on my behalf as a courtesy to get ahead of any age-related concerns. Age-related concerns. I canceled the appointment, asked the office to note in my file that no one was authorized to schedule appointments on my behalf, and hung up. Then I sat at the kitchen table, very still, for a long time. I was not angry. Anger, again, implies that something is beyond your control. What I felt was something colder than anger and more useful. I understood now that this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a campaign. The cognitive screening wasn't concern. It was documentation. If a physician recorded that I showed signs of cognitive decline, that record could be used in a legal filing. Diminished capacity, contested decisions, conservatorship. I opened my laptop and began researching. I called Patricia the next morning with the new information. She wasn't surprised. The pattern is escalating, she said. The unauthorized appointment is significant. If they're building toward a capacity challenge, they'll want documentation that predates any sale or transfer. Which means timing matters, I said. Timing is everything, she said. We spoke for 40 minutes. By the end of the call, I had made the decision. I didn't tell anyone. My son brought dinner the following Sunday. His wife stayed home this time. He came alone, carrying a bag from the Italian place I used to like, before it changed ownership. He was gentler than he'd been on the phone. He refilled my water glass without being asked. He asked about the dahlias. I let him talk. I kept my expression open, attentive, the way I used to look at him across the breakfast table when he was 8 years old and telling me about a dream. I've been thinking, I said eventually. You're right that I should be more practical about all this. He set down his fork. Really? I'm 68, I said. I can't pretend the house isn't a lot. He nodded, carefully. Like a man who has learned not to seem too eager. Maybe we should look at options, I said, properly, with the right people involved. That's all I've been trying to say, he said. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. We'll figure this out together. I smiled. I poured more iced tea. I asked about his children's soccer schedules. While he talked, I thought about the phone call I had made on Friday. Patricia had connected me with a private listing agent who specialized in estate sales and quiet transactions. No yard sign, no open house, no public listing. Qualified buyers only, by referral. She had already toured the house. I told my son I'd had a cleaning service in, which was not entirely untrue. I had also mopped the floors, and she had said the same thing Patricia predicted. It would move quickly. The offer came on a Wednesday. I was in the studio when Patricia called. Cash buyer, she said. Pre-approved. They're flexible on closing but can move in 21 days if needed. I set down the quilt square I was holding. Outside the window, the last of the dahlias had gone brown at the edges. How long do I have to decide? I asked. 72 hours on the offer, she said, but I'd recommend sooner. I accepted that evening. I signed the purchase agreement at Patricia's office the following morning. It was a gray Thursday. The coffee in the small waiting area was burnt, and someone had left a half-finished crossword puzzle on the side table. The buyers, a couple in their late 30s who were relocating from Pittsburgh, signed by video notary from their kitchen. I signed in person, pen on paper, 4 times. When the final page was done, Patricia organized the documents into a neat stack and looked at me. How do you feel? She asked. Ready, I said. The closing was scheduled for 15 days out. I had 2 weeks to decide what to take and what to leave. I started telling my son nothing, not from cruelty, from strategy. When he called that Thursday evening to ask if I'd given the arrangement any more thought, I said I was still considering things carefully. True. When his wife texted on Saturday to ask if I'd be free to meet with their tax advisor the following week, I said I'd check my calendar. I did not check my calendar. The following Monday, I rented a small storage unit on the south side of town. I moved the things I was keeping, the wingback chair, 3 boxes of my husband's books, the studio table, the quilt in progress, my mother's china, in 3 quiet trips across 2 days. My neighbor Adele helped me carry the table. She didn't ask many questions. She has known me for 22 years and understands that I do things with intention. Are you all right? She asked, on the second trip. I'm better than I've been in months, I said. She nodded once and handed me a thermos of coffee. I kept the house looking undisturbed. I left the furniture my son had already mentally repurposed. I left the curtains and the rug in the den and the dishes in the cabinet. The house needed to look like nothing was happening for 12 more days. On day 11, my son called with a new urgency in his voice. Gwyneth talked to someone at the county clerk's office, he said, about the process for the transfer. They said we'd want to file before the new year. I understand, I said, so we need to move on this, Mom, soon. I know, I said. I'm working on it. The closing happened on a Tuesday morning. Patricia and I arrived at the title company's office at 9. The building was downtown, 3 blocks from the courthouse, in a suite that smelled of toner and old carpet. The buyers were joining remotely again, their faces calm and slightly pixelated on a laptop screen. The title officer walked us through each document. Deed of conveyance, settlement statement, transfer tax forms, final title insurance. I signed every page with a steady hand. At no point did my hand shake, my voice waver, or my attention drift. At 9:47 in the morning, the house was no longer mine. At 9:49, the wire transfer was confirmed. The title officer closed her folder and said, "Congratulations." Patricia drove me back to my car. We sat in the parking lot for a moment. "What's next?" she asked. "Driving," I said. My apartment, a 1-bedroom unit in a small city in western North Carolina, rented 3 weeks earlier through a property management company, using my own name and my own credit history, was 8 hours south. I had paid the first 6 months in advance. The keys were already in my purse. I had one more stop to make. I drove back to the house. I had 48 hours before possession transferred, and I wanted to walk it one last time. It was mid-morning on a weekday. The street was quiet. I unlocked the front door with a key that belonged to me for the last time and went inside. I moved through each room without sitting down. The den still smelled faintly of the cedar chest I'd moved out. The kitchen tile was exactly as I'd always known it. the slight, uneven grout line near the refrigerator that had been there since 1991. Upstairs, the guest room window still let in too much morning light. The studio was empty now, just the marks on the hardwood floor where the table had stood. I stood in the studio doorway for a long moment. Then I went downstairs, left the keys on the kitchen counter next to a note with the agent's contact information, and walked out. I locked the door from the outside with my key, then put the key through the mail slot. I got in my car. My phone rang before I reached the end of Millbrook Road. My son. I let it ring. I turned onto the main road and pointed south. He reached me 7 hours later, somewhere in Tennessee, when I stopped for gas and coffee. I saw 4 missed calls and a text that read, "Call me immediately." I called him back. "Where are you?" he said. "No hello." "Driving," I answered. "Driving where?" "We went to the house. There's a lockbox on the door. The neighbor said a cleaning crew came yesterday." "The house sold this morning," I said. Silence. "I'm sorry," he said. "I sold this morning," I said. "I sold the house. The closing was at 9 o'clock. "You!" He stopped. Started again. "You can't do that. You can't just... We were in the middle of a conversation." "We were," I agreed. I listened carefully. Then I made my decision. "This is insane." His voice had shifted into something I hadn't heard before. Not anger. Panic. "You don't have that. You can't just sell a house in secret. They're illegal. Patricia will answer any legal questions you have," I said. "She has all the documentation." "Who is Patricia?" "My attorney." Another silence. "You hired an attorney." "I did." He said something away from the phone to his wife, I assumed. Then, "Where are you going?" "Somewhere quieter," I said. "Mom, you've just thrown away everything we were trying to build." I pulled back onto the highway. The sun was setting over the mountains to the west, turning everything gold and pink and impossible. "I didn't throw anything away," I said. "I protected something. There's a difference. We're family," he said. That word again. Heavy as stone, used as leverage. "We are," I agreed. "That's why I'm telling you myself, instead of letting you find out another way." I ended the call. I drove until midnight. I stopped at a rest area in the mountains and ate the sandwich Adele had packed for me without being asked. I sat in the dark with the windows cracked and listened to the wind through the pines. I didn't cry. I didn't second guess. I ate my sandwich and I drove. The apartment in North Carolina was on the second floor of a converted house, and the bedroom window looked out over a small river that ran fast and brown in the early mornings. On the first day, I unpacked the wingback chair, my husband's books, and the jade teapot. I didn't mention the teapot before, but I've had it for 30 years, and it goes wherever I go. I set it on the kitchen windowsill. Then I made tea and stood at the window and watched the river. My son called again that evening, and the evening after. On the third day, I answered. "Where are you?" he asked. "Safe," I said. "That's not an answer. It's the one I'm giving." He was quieter now. The panic from the highway had settled into something more controlled, which made me more careful, not less. "We've talked to someone," he said. "A lawyer. They say a sale can be challenged if the seller was under undue influence or not acting with full capacity." "I acted with full capacity and full documentation," I said. "Patricia has my medical records, financial records, and a notarized statement from my physician confirming I am of sound mind and managing my own affairs. The sale is clean." A long pause. "You planned all of this," he said. "Yes," I said. "I did. While you were sitting across from me at dinner telling me you were open to options." "I was open to options," I said. "I chose mine." I could hear him breathing. "Then you made us look terrible. The neighbors, the buyers, everyone knows now." "I didn't tell anyone anything," I said. "A real estate transaction is a matter of public record. You could have talked to us." "I did talk to you," I said. "Every time you came over without calling. Every time you sent someone to my door. Every time you scheduled something in my name without my knowledge. I talked. You didn't listen." The silence that followed was different from the others, less charged, more honest. "We thought you needed help," he said. His voice was different now, too. Smaller. "I know," I said. "That's the part that's hardest to forgive. Not the deed. Not the consultant. The cognitive appointment. You told a medical office that I had age-related concerns. You tried to create a record that could be used against me. That was not help." He didn't deny it. Gwyneth and I thought that if we could just get documentation. "I know what you thought," I said quietly. Silence. "We were wrong," he said. 2 words, flat and insufficient, but real. "Yes," I said. I let that sit. I found work within the first 2 weeks. A small independent bookstore in town, run by a woman in her early 60s named Ruth, who had kept the shop open for 18 years through 3 economic downturns and a pandemic. She was looking for morning help, someone who could open the store, manage the front shelves, and talk to customers about books. "Do you have any retail experience?" she asked. "I have 68 years of reading experience," I said. She hired me. The work suited me. The store was narrow and warm, and smelled the way a bookstore should, of paper and possibility. The customers were mostly locals, retired professors, young parents with strollers, the occasional college student looking for something the library didn't carry. People told me things while holding books. About their mothers, their divorces, their uncertainty about the future. I listened. I recommended novels. I climbed the rolling ladder to reach the top shelves without being asked if I needed help. Nobody watched me for signs of decline. Nobody measured anything. 6 weeks after I left Ohio, my son sent a letter, handwritten on plain paper. He'd addressed it to me at Patricia's office. She forwarded it without comment. It was short. "Mom, I've been thinking about how this started. We told ourselves we were worried about you. I think we were worried about ourselves. There's a difference, and I should have seen it sooner. I'm sorry for the appointment. I'm sorry for the deed. I don't know how to fix this, but I hope you're well." It wasn't a full apology. It was the beginning of one, which is different from nothing. I folded it and put it in the tin box where I keep my husband's letters. My granddaughter called on a Tuesday. She'd gotten my number from her father, I assumed. Her voice was tentative and young and entirely unguarded. "Grandma, are you okay?" she asked. "I'm very well," I said. "How are you?" Dad said, "You moved." "I did." "Do you have a garden?" I looked out the window at the small courtyard below. There were pots on the stone steps. I hadn't planted anything yet. "I'm about to start one," I said. She told me about her soccer season. She told me about a book she was reading for school that she didn't understand. I told her what to look for in the 3rd chapter. She laughed once, sudden and bright, and the sound came through the phone like something I'd forgotten was still possible. When we hung up, I sat with the phone in my lap for a while. The distance was real. I had chosen it with open eyes, and I didn't regret it. But I understood now that choices like this one echo. They change the shape of things in ways that take years to fully know. I wasn't the villain of this story. Neither, quite, was my son. We were 2 people who each believed they were protecting something, and only one of us had protected the right thing. It's been 3 months. The river outside my window has slowed since November. The water lower and cleaner. I walk along it most mornings before the bookstore opens. Sometimes I bring coffee in a thermos. Sometimes I bring a book. Sometimes I bring nothing and just walk. I still speak with my son, carefully, like people who have been through something and are trying to understand its shape. There are no more threats, no more consultants, no more documents slid across tables. The subject of the house doesn't come up. It lives between us now as a fact, settled and irreversible, neither of us quite ready to name what it means. Last month, I went back to Ohio for Christmas. I stayed at a hotel, which felt right. I didn't drive past the house. I'm told the new owners have put up a wooden fence along the back, which I would not have done, but it's their choice now. And that is entirely as it should be. Christmas dinner was at my son's rental. His wife was reserved but not unkind. She passed me the bread without being asked. Small things matter. My granddaughter showed me a drawing she'd made of the dahlias, from memory. She'd gotten the color almost exactly right. After dinner, my son and I stood in the back doorway while the kids played in the yard. He didn't say much. Neither did I. We watched his daughter do a cartwheel in the dead November grass. "You look good," he said finally. "I am good," I said finally. "I am good," I said. He nodded. "I didn't think you'd actually do it." "I know," I said. A long pause. The children's voices carried in the cold air. "I thought you'd need us," he said. Quietly, not cruel, just honest. "I considered that. I do need you," I said. "Just not in the way you decided." He looked at me then, the way he used to when he was young, and I'd said something he needed to think about. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. We went back inside. I flew home to North Carolina the next morning. The mountains appeared through the plane window just before landing, purple and enormous in the early light. The river would be cold this time of year, half frozen at the edges. I had a shift at the bookstore at 10. Ruth was letting me take over the poetry section, reorganize it the way I thought it should be arranged. I had opinions about that. Specific, considered opinions. I had things to do, plans that were mine, a life that fit the shape of who I am, not the shape of what I was assumed to need. At 68, I did not go quietly. I did not fold. I did not hand over a single thing that wasn't freely given. And in the quiet of that small apartment, with the river outside and the tea on the sill and the quilt half finished on the table, I am more myself than I have been in years. That is not a small thing. At any age, that is everything. Hello, my dear friends, I'm Olivia. No one gets to write your ending while you're still in the middle of the story. If you've ever had someone decide what you need before asking, you know exactly what I mean. What would you have done in my place? Leave your answer in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, please like and subscribe. It means more than you know. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in an abstract way, in a very specific kitchen table way. Because what my son and his wife set in motion had a logic to it, even if they didn't see it clearly. Every choice they made called forward the next thing. The unannounced visits led to the pre-filled deed. The deed led to the consultant at my door. The consultant led to the canceled medical appointment. And the appointment, the one scheduled behind my back, the one designed to create a paper trail about my decline. That was the moment everything shifted. Not because it frightened me, because it clarified something I had been trying not to see. When people act against you quietly, they're counting on you not to act at all. They're counting on love to hold you in place, and love does hold you. I won't pretend otherwise. I sat across that oak table from my son and felt the full weight of 43 years of knowing him, of driving him to baseball practice and sitting up with him through fevers and watching him become a man I was proud of. That weight is real. It doesn't disappear because someone makes a bad decision or even several bad decisions. But love and compliance are not the same thing. That's what I had to learn, or maybe relearn at 68 years old. What my son and his wife did. The deed, the consultant, the appointment, those weren't just overreaches. They were a kind of answer to a question I hadn't known they'd been asking. Do you trust yourself enough to act? And I found out, by having to, that the answer was yes. There's something I want to say about intelligence, because I think people get it wrong. Intelligence isn't about knowing things. It's about knowing what a situation actually is, not what it looks like on the surface. My son told himself he was protecting me. He may have believed it, but underneath that story was a simpler one. They needed space. They wanted the asset, and they had decided that what I needed was beside the point. Seeing that clearly, not angrily, just accurately, was the most useful thing I did in this entire situation. And then there's the question of what you do with what you see. That's where nerve comes in. Not courage in some dramatic sense, just the ordinary willingness to act on your own behalf, even when it's uncomfortable, even when the people watching you don't understand what you're doing or why. I signed the papers in a quiet office on a cold Tuesday morning. I drove 8 hours south with a thermos of coffee and a quilt half finished in the back seat. I started over in a small apartment by a river, and I went to work in a bookstore, and I called my granddaughter on Tuesdays. None of that was loud. None of it was revenge. It was just a woman deciding at an age when many people expect you to shrink, to take up exactly as much space as she needed. The thing about cause and effect is it runs in both directions. My son's choices caused my response, but my response, the trust, the attorney, the sale, the drive south, those have causes too. 41 years of building a life on my own terms. A late husband who believed I could handle anything. Years of learning that you don't have to explain yourself to people who've already decided what you are. That's not luck. That's what happens when you spend a lifetime practicing integrity, even when no one's watching. What you build in the quiet years is what you stand on when it matters.